of COVID, and then to talk about Act 133, which is effective on Monday. So we're at this really interesting place where the law is changing on Monday, and then we'll talk about what's going to happen in the future. So really the question is, who does open meeting law apply to? It applies to all public bodies. So that's state bodies, local bodies, municipal boards, councils, commissions, and all the committees and subcommittees that are attached to those bodies. So it's almost impossible to draw because there's so many of types. It's hard to describe because once you start naming the types of bodies and committees, you're almost by default excluding somebody. So it's really any time that the state or local government is doing something with more people than one or two. So that's one way to think about it. But with the new law, there's different requirements for different types of bodies. So we'll get into that and start talking about that, those new nuances. It used to be that open meeting law applied the same way for all public bodies. And what Act 133 is doing is creating some new requirements or different requirements depending on what type of body you are and what either state or local and what type of work you're doing. So we'll get into that. So when are you having a meeting? When does the open meeting law apply? It's anytime there's a quorum of the group. Then you're holding a meeting, and a quorum is a majority of the public body. So if you are a public body of 12, a quorum is 6. If you're a public body of 8, a quorum is 4. So it's really dependent on the total number of people that are part of your body, and then the number that are together. A meeting is also a gathering of a quorum to discuss business or take action. So business means the body's government functions, including matters over which you have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. And we are going to give everybody a copy of this PowerPoint, along with Brian is collecting questions, and then we'll be providing answers via email. So you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint and questions that I'll either answer on the spot, and he'll keep record of the questions, so you get a written one, or there may be ones that we need to go back and take a look at. So don't feel like you have to take copious notes, is what I'm saying. What is not a meeting? Because that's almost as important a question as what is a meeting. One of the questions that comes into our office a lot is email, telephone, teleconferencing. Is this a meeting? And the answer is no, if it's just to schedule a meeting, organize an agenda, or distribute materials. It's really, the key question is there other business of the body? Is there other business besides those things? If you're not discussing logistics, you probably are having a meeting. So if you're discussing what should we decide on this, or what are you going to vote on this, then you're probably getting into a meeting. Another frequently discussed question is, what about a retreat or a social event? So that could be social gatherings, conventions, conferences, trainings, press conferences. I bet we might have a quorum of a body participating in this training right now. Media events. The answer is that's not a meeting unless you're discussing specific business of the public body. And at that time, at the time of the exchange, this is the tricky thing. So you could be discussing the business and then anticipating that the body will act on that business later. So it doesn't mean that you're just deciding, how should we approve the building of this bridge? That you might think, oh, we're not going to be making a decision. We're just talking about the attributes of the bridge. Well, think about it from the public's perspective. They're missing the discussion about the attributes to the bridge. So it could be that you're discussing how do we make decisions? How do we gather the perspectives of people before we make a decision? That is fine. But if you're talking about a specific decision that you might make, then, and the logistics around the specific decision you might make, and even if you're voting on it later, that's probably you're in a meeting. And I don't know if that makes sense. The nuance between that, you know, how you communicate versus talking about a specific item, it can be tricky. So here is another question that we're asked. You know, what if a quorum of a public body is at another public body's meeting? You're not in a meeting at that time. And specifically because you're not taking action on your business. We like to encourage public bodies to start to think about inclusivity, and at its heart, Act 133 is contemplating inclusivity, and some of the modifications are around inclusivity. But things that we want people to think about is who can physically come into the building, who can access the technology, who can access the agenda and the materials for the agenda, who can see the conversation, who can hear the conversation, and who can add to the conversation. Because really at its heart, open meeting law wants the public to be involved in government business and have knowledge of what government is doing. So those are some important factors to be thinking about. With that, what notice should the public have of a meeting? It depends what type of meeting it is. So there's 3 different types. There's a regular meeting, there's a special meeting, and there's an emergency meeting. And there is some changes to the notice requirement for remote and hybrid meetings, but we'll get into that. But the 3 different types of meetings that bodies have, whether they're in person, hybrid, or fully remote, the notice requirements in the open meeting law all are the same as they have been. So the new nuances of how do we hold the meeting is separate and distinct from what type of meeting is this. Is it a regular meeting, an emergency meeting, or a special meeting? What should be on the agenda? We didn't really fully answer this in this slide, but regular meeting, it needs to be at least 5 days, I believe, before the regular meeting that the agenda is posted. Special meeting is at least 24 hours, and emergency meeting is as soon as possible. So if an emergency meeting means really a public body should be careful about when they call an emergency meeting. There's specific requirements in the law for when you can do so. It's really like we have to decide something right now. And we generally recommend that people, if they feel like they need an emergency meeting, explore whether they can have a special meeting instead, because the law is clearer for when notice and the public can participate with a special meeting than it is for the emergency meeting. What should be on the agenda? There are updates to this requirement that we'll go into in a little bit. But really, any topic that you anticipate will be discussed. Obviously, there's things that cannot be anticipated that should be clear that they're reflected in the minutes. But any specific topics that you anticipate discussing, if you have a potential action that you're anticipating, it's prudent to put that on the agenda. The location and time of the meeting should be on the agenda. And if it's remote or hybrid, that is the location. So it should be on the agenda. And that is new. It was always part of how folks would talk about open meeting, but with Act 133, it's now codified in the law. So how you join needs to be on the minutes, on the agenda. Where and how should the minutes be posted? This has not changed. It needs to be no later than 5 calendar days after the meeting. It should be on the website if the body maintains a website, and they should be on the website for at least a year. If you don't have it a website, then a public place where you typically would post things is what we tell people. And draft minutes can be replaced with approved minutes. So once you approve the minutes, you can take down the draft minutes and substitute the approved. The Act 133 requires all non-advisory bodies to electronically record their meetings. This is a new requirement. If you are non-advisory, which we'll get into, which I would suspect the majority of you are, you need to electronically record your meeting. This can be, because you're a local body, it can, mostly local bodies, this can be just an audio recording. If you are a state body, it would have to be audio and visual. So, and then once you have the recording, it needs to be in a designated electronic spot for 30 days after the minutes from the previous meeting have been posted. So you have your meeting on day A, then you come to meeting B, you approve your A minutes, and your recording for meeting A needs to be posted for 30 days after meeting B. And there should be, we'll have to come up with some fancy graphic to describe that, because we're still, you know, full disclosure, this is new law. And we're still trying to figure out how to explain it, what the questions are. And so if you have feedback about that, please give it to us, because we want to be really as clear as possible, provide help to people. I think a graphic there would be really helpful. So that's a note.
So, excuse me, well, you don't want us to ask questions now, right?
I don't actually mind if you do, but if you want to, I don't mind.
I was writing down like a list of questions, but sometimes for me, it might be easier to do it in the moment.
Yeah.
But I don't need one now, thank you.
Okay. I answer questions.
I might have missed out at the beginning, so we walked over we were at the wrong location, or the place, sorry.
Yeah. I think, well, let's actually pause for questions, because I'm about to go into the changes in the law. So this is just a good time to talk about where we have been. So yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm on a municipal library board, and right now the chair has created a hiring committee for a new library director position.
Mhm.
And I believe, and I think he's probably participating, but that you only, if you have two people on your subcommittee, that you don't have to adhere to the open meeting law. And so it's a little bit confusing. And I'm not really sure, I don't really understand if that is appropriate or not. Because I think you do say that subcommittees of the committee should adhere to open meeting law. Right. So that's one way that I think that he was trying to not do that, but can you speak to that?
So the subcommittee is only two people?
Yes, it was talked about in public that they were going to be having a community member join, or and maybe another person from the library, but that never happened. So it's two people.
Well, so this is an interesting question. Again, we'll go back to my big disclaimer, but
Yeah.
there are exceptions to the open meeting law as well. So there could be that there's an exception to the open meeting law for personnel decisions. And so that may be the exception for why it would not be required to be an open meeting, because if you're hiring someone,
Yeah.
that would be a very difficult thing to do in the public.
Right. Right.
But the discussions around who to hire, maybe. So I don't know. I would have to understand how many people, the intent of the subcommittee, and how many people were put in. It's very fact dependent.
Yeah.
Is my answer to you. But there is an exception under the open meeting law for personnel decisions. That do not have to be.
But still, there are facts that would inform the right.
Well, the follow-up meetings about what you're doing or what questions you're gonna ask. I don't know, the scope and breadth of the subject. All right, and you and then we start.
Back to the posting and 30 days.
Yes,
Is it 30 days of the video from the draft or from the approved?
from the approved.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have meeting A and you have the recording of meeting A, you come to meeting B, you approve the minutes, and then it's 30 days after the approval of the minutes during meeting B. And then, yeah.
So in the past, all of our boards and commissions have actually approved their minutes, but they weren't required to. Now the laws changed, so minutes have to be approved.
So that requirement has actually not been changed. It hasn't been added. It is always our suggestion that bodies do approve their minutes. It's really best practice to do that. But if the body does not, we've been working with the LCT and with the School Board Association. And this is a little bit of a gray area in the new law, but we are saying that our recommendation, our joint recommendation, is that if you have meeting A and you have minutes and then you have meeting B, you don't take official action to approve your minutes. You keep the posting for 30 days after meeting B, because that fits the intent of the law the best way that we can figure out. So that's our best guess at this point. But ultimately, the questions and the courts will help us determine this. And this is an area where maybe down the line, approval of minutes will be required. I don't know, but it's not there right now.
Did I hear you correctly say that for a regular meeting, that the agenda should be 5 days?
I don't think that's right. I think that's
3 days.
3 days, yeah.
It's 5 days to post.
5 days, yes, here, yeah.
Okay.
3 days.
That's okay.
And then I have
It's Bofa.
one additional question is, talking about, some recording, like the visual recording, on our website, like we have Peg TV who does our recording for the non-advisory body, and it's on their website, so is it, we should post a link to that for each meeting, or just a link to Peg TV itself?
So, you should ensure that the recordings are in your designated locations. So that could be on your website or an alternate provider. It could be YouTube, it could be Peg TV, it could be, I don't even know, something else. But you need to make sure that the public knows where they can find your videos.
Okay.
And then the question about, the sort of trickle down question to that is, if you have a third party hosting your video, how do you ensure, or do you want to ensure, deletion of the video? You don't have to. There's not a mandate that the video is deleted 30 days after meeting B. But there's some reasons why you might want the video deleted. And we talked about this a lot in the legislature. There's a cost to digital storage, just physical cost, financial cost. But there's also, the Law Act 133 was not intending to change the official record of the meeting. The official record of the meeting is the minutes. That's why we like them to be approved. That the recording is not the official record of the meeting. So for a lot of bodies, the deletion of the recording after 30 days after meeting B helps with the official record of the meeting. So that's something to consider. If you're putting it on YouTube, how do you make sure that it comes off of YouTube? If you want it to come off, or if it's with Peg, those are conversations you may want to have.
Could you repeat the questions for the folks online after
Oh.
this? Just gotta know after
Okay.
that. I do have a question too, if
Yeah.
you're good, and this would be for our smallest towns in our region without websites or virtual meeting technology. Is the intent of this to be as flexible as possible, so they could have an old school video, audio recorder on a table, and that same recorder could just sit at the town office, and anyone from the public for those 30 days could
I
come?
have a slide on this.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
I got a
great.
slide.
Alright.
Were there any questions in the chat?
There was just one, and it was referring to the posting. Oftentimes, minutes are not necessarily approved at the next meeting for various reasons. In reality, it could be a future meetings into the future. Would that matter?
So if you approve your minutes, I would wait to delete your recording until 30 days after you approve the minutes, even if you've met multiple times. If your practice is to approve minutes, I think the best recommendation, and actually the law says 30 days after you approve your minutes. So if your practice is you have 5 meetings and then you approve all the minutes from those 5 meetings, then keep the recordings until 30 days after that approval of those minutes.
Got people asking me questions from our town, so there's some
Okay.
on here. So can a chair of another board come to another meeting and say, the chair of the DRB, after they had, then go to the planning commission meeting and say that he's had a meeting and has an opinion as the chair? that board, of the board.
So,
I realize you're not
Yeah,
for
yeah.
our legal counsel.
Can we just repeat that question?
yeah, so the question is, can a chair of one public body come to another public body's meeting and represent the opinion as the chair of the body? So can the chair of the Development Review Board come to the Planning Commission's meeting and say, as the chair of the Development Review Board, this is the opinion?
And I say that they should have a letter written up by the zoning administrator as the full rule, but the question is, can the chair?
So foundational is, yes, anyone can go to any meeting, even if they hold a position in another body. So yes. The question of whether or not they can represent the opinion of another body is really dependent on the body's authorization to that. So best practice is a letter saying that you can represent the opinion, or something in the minutes that says the board discussed the chair going to another public bodies and supporting the opinion, and that the body voted on that and agreed. So if I was the chair of a public body, that's what I would want, because you don't want to be ahead of your skis, right? You don't want to be representing something that you weren't authorized to represent.
Just go back to when the agendas officially need to be posted.
3 days, I misspoke. I said 5, I was wrong, it's 3. That has not changed. The minutes have to be posted within 5 days after the meeting. That's where I got bumbled. It's 3 days before. There's a lot of rules. Okay, any other questions on what we've covered? And I failed to repeat the question. The question was the agenda for a regular meeting, which should be posted 3 days. Okay. Nothing else. All right. What should be different if the meeting is remote, completely remote, or hybrid? So there are changes under the new law of when fully remote or hybrid meetings are permissible. Hybrid meetings are always permissible, but remote only, there's some restrictions around when that's permissible. But what needs to be different if that happens, if one or more members are attending remotely, you need to make introductions. People need to know who's speaking and what everybody's name is, because that's something that if you're in person, you can figure out a little bit better, but if someone is remote, it's very hard to figure out. And if you do not have a vote that is unanimous, do a roll call vote so people know how people are voting. If a quorum attends remotely, then the agenda must designate a physical location for the meeting, and this is if it's hybrid. And at least one board or staff member must be physically present. So if it's a hybrid meeting or an in-person meeting where some people are remote, there needs to be a physical location with some staff there. So that's true if a quorum is attending remotely. If you decide that you are
In the next 2 days.
in the next 2 days, that you're going to waive the physical location. So before COVID, everything was physical. You had to always be in person, as you guys well know, because you're good, dedicated public servants, and you drove to public meetings probably all the time. And then COVID occurred, and we did so many things remotely. And the question before the legislature was, what do we keep from what we've learned from COVID? And so what is in the law is that if you are a body that can opt to have a hybrid or in special occasions, a fully remote meeting, you must use technology that permits remote public participation. Whenever feasible, you have to allow public access by phone because not everyone has a computer. You have to post, and just to note, most computer applications have a phone option. So Teams has a phone option, Zoom has a phone option. So it sounds really cumbersome, but if you're using those platforms, there's a phone option. You have to post information and include it on the agenda about how you can access the meeting electronically. And you have to electronically record meetings unless there's unusual circumstances, which we have a slide for that. So we'll get there. Public comment, that's another important piece of any public meeting, often dreaded, sometimes interesting. So the public has to, this is in the law, the public has to be given an opportunity to comment on matters considered by the body during the meeting. Now that is, there is in the law a constraint. Someone can't come to your meeting and talk about something that wasn't on the agenda, that wasn't discussed, something from left field. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but the chair can sort of constrain the conversation a little bit that way. And things that we are asked all the time is, are the constraints of the chair reasonable? Because that's the question. And usually we say you need to go talk to your lawyer because there's a lot of variety of what people do to keep public comment constrained and orderly. A lot of it is totally meets the meaning of the law, but you just need to talk it through with someone. And unfortunately, the Secretary of State is just not, we just can't give legal advice about that. I will pause for questions again. Is there any questions in chat? Let's give the remote folks.
There was one chat question about, you spoke briefly earlier about the efficacy of handling personnel matters such as hiring. Where can we find more resources on this to get the specifics on how this should look? I assume you're referencing executive session.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have a slide.
We don't have a slide in this presentation. We have a long presentation and a short presentation. And we took executive session out.
Okay.
Because we would have never gotten through Act 133. But we do have a slide on executive session, and we'll make sure that it's given to you guys in the future.
I got one over here again. So when people are coming in on Zoom and all of a sudden it says iPhone 13,
Yes.
no, our town, okay, please tell us who you are, because you have to write down who's attending the meeting.
Yes.
Going once, going twice, going three, pick them out.
Oh.
I mean, we're told that we're supposed to know who they are.
Yeah.
We don't know if they're there to ruin it later if they don't have a name.
Yeah, I can't comment on whether or not we should kick people out if they don't know. Because I think about it in person. Would you kick someone? I mean, I think this is a relevant question.
Well, now it's because of the Zoom, and it's.
Right.
And then we've been bombed. So we don't know we're gonna get bombed, so since then, we're like, if it says iPhone.
So if a person comes in
In person, we don't take anyone out.
Yeah.
Because we know who they are, we have them fill out the form. They put their name down.
But if they refuse, I think this is the question. If they refuse, would you call the sheriff and have them physically removed?
Well, usually the police officers, they're not getting it.
What would you ask him?
Well, then we're gonna know them, Devin. I mean, we know everybody, so then we put down the name. It's just a matter of us trying to put down who is there.
I think what the deputy is getting at is equal application online or in person.
Well, we don't, yeah, but it is equal, because we know who that person is that's there, but we don't know who's on the Zoom.
I don't.
But
feel
you're
like
not,
I'll answer the
you're not
question.
allowed to answer. I was
Yeah.
just thinking maybe I could get a little.
I think it's important to think about, and I think it's important to talk about, oh no, someone can't see the slides. Can other folks online see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that you get a copy of the slides. I don't know what the issue is, but we'll make sure. I think it's important to, I don't know your name. Lauren.
For us.
For us, yeah. What Lauren said is absolutely right. Equal application, regardless of how you're coming in. So maybe you're doing that. And I would think that the other thing that would be really different is making sure that the person has notice of what's going to happen if they don't stay, right? Because if we're in a meeting and a sheriff is saying, you need to tell us who you are, otherwise I'm going to escort you out of the meeting, you have a lot of notice. If you just say iPhone 13, please tell us who you are, iPhone 13, please tell us who you are, iPhone 13, tell us who you are, and then you kick them out. That's not the same amount of notice. So just think about the notice you're giving the person. And I'll tell you, I am somebody who loves remote meetings because I have 2 kids who play sports, who do all sorts of things, and I have a very busy work life, and I attend the public meetings by remotely, but I could go be making dinner. I step away from the computer for a minute. I don't know what's gonna happen. So maybe think about on your agenda saying if you're attending remotely.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, so that's great. So if you're giving people notice of that, what you're gonna ask them and when you're gonna ask them. So they know, don't go chopping carrots right now, you know?
There was one more question from the folks online, well, 2, but, and I'm guessing this will be it, tied to your attorney. But just to clarify, the legislature requires reasonable time to participate in a meeting, but did not define what is reasonable. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, etc.
Right.
Again,
Totally. I won't say go talk to your attorney, but what I'll say is meetings have different lengths, there's different numbers of commentators. If there's 30 public commenters on a school budget, you can't hear from everybody for 5 minutes each. So I think it is reasonable to say to public commentators, keep your comments to a minute or a minute and a half. And if there's duplication, think about what you may add that's different from what somebody else said. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But it's really dependent. It's the number of commentators, it's the number of, and then the length of the meeting that matters.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just that, going back to that hypothetical where you have a lot of people that maybe 30 people they each have 5 minutes worth of something to say. And, the board suddenly said, no, we're only going to get 1 minute. How is that, that is not really representing like the people's interest in voicing their concern or praise either way on a.
Praise.
When you suddenly say, well, because of time constraints, you're going to have to condense 5 minutes into 1. I can talk for 1 minute and say nothing at all, and it's still not get to the point where I'm yeah, but that's just kind of a reality of, having an open meeting and having people making sure that people have the ability to have a voice. And when that recourse, when they're, what recourse do people or does the public have if that continually happens over and over? That's something that I run into.
Yeah, no, I think, so the question is, the reasonableness and limiting the time that people can speak. What's the impact on the people whose time is limited, and what is the recourse? I think that's fair. So the impact is significant. The chair should think about anytime there's a restriction or you're making a sort of reasonableness calls. And my best advice is if it's something where you have 30 people there, think really carefully about saying to anybody that you don't want to hear them, because that usually means that's when you need to hear them. And we sometimes in those situations advise bodies to have a public hearing as opposed to try and put other topics on the agenda. So you can make an agenda that just says public comments on the meeting beforehand so that you have more time to hear everybody out and stop trying to do 2 things at the same time. Now that has impacts too because you are it means you can't get your business done, but sometimes topics are big enough that it's worth holding a meeting just for the purpose of hearing from the public about something that you're trying to decide. The other thing is you can accept written comments. I've seen boards do that pretty successfully so that if you're restricting time, you can take someone's written testimony. And the recourse, there is a slide on that. But the recourse is anybody in the public can make a complaint to the Attorney General's office for an open meeting law violation. You can also make a complaint to the body itself and the body will have to adjudicate that. So nobody wants to have a complaint made against them. I don't think any public body, for them, absent complete malfeasance, most people don't want the public to feel like they're not invited to talk and participate. So all of these things are like a seesaw. You're trying to balance everybody and everybody's needs, the board's needs, the public's needs, And how do you find the right balance? And it's really tricky, and there's no great answer, which is why sometimes you just need to talk it through with your own attorney so that you can understand how you can navigate this really tricky process.
I understand, just one quick follow-up question. How many of these, complaints go before the Attorney General? Do you know, like, offhand, how many, open meeting violations get pushed, and do they go anywhere? Because is there any, we have a law, but is there, if there's no recourse, a board or a committee just continues to have improper action and, and say the complaint goes out, will something happen or will it just, fall into the ether?
So I don't know the specific numbers of, oh yeah, repeat the question. Thank you. The question was, how many complaints are made, and do they actually go anywhere to the Attorney General's office? I can say our office, I don't want to speak for the Attorney General's office. I know that we refer complaints to them, or we help people navigate and get to them. Our office receives, I would say, anywhere from 30 to 40 distinct complaints about from the public about open meeting law concerns. I don't know if they're all complaints, but that's a year. Do they go anywhere? I think that my knowledge of the Attorney General's office is that they generally try and reach out to the body and have the body correct themselves, use it as an educational moment first, before there is litigation that has happened. But the piece that I think is interesting on enforcement and violations that isn't in the slide and isn't in the law is the media. The media pays attention to when they don't have access to a meeting or when the public feels like they don't have access to the meeting. And that is typically corrective. Not always, but it is typically corrective. So if the media is feeling like there's the public doesn't have access to a meeting or they don't have access to a meeting, they'll write about it. And you see that. And that sometimes is corrective. Not always, but sometimes. But to the teeth of the law, that's been a topic that our office has talked about, that the Attorney General's office has talked about. Act 133 really didn't get into that. I think that's the next iteration of law changes, is what do you do when things go poorly, and how do you respond. But the law didn't make that any tougher or more teeth or more clarity. Any other questions from online folks? Okay. So this slide we also made, 3 weeks ago, because now it's about to do it. So it's even more than aspire. It's what are we actually doing? It's really trying to make meetings more accessible, so that the public can attend, to create more transparency in deliberations and decisions, and to standardize some rules and best practices, because people are doing things even before COVID, people were doing things all different ways. Some people were not approving their minutes. Some people would think, why would you ever not do that? So there wasn't a standard that people were following. And so we wanted to elevate some standards and best practices. What does it actually do? It's updating the open meeting laws we've discussed to figure out how to incorporate and when to incorporate remote and hybrid meetings. So there's a new distinction in public bodies of advisory and non-advisory. And it allows for remote only meetings for advisory public body that's subject to public participation requirements. And all public bodies can meet remote only under specified emergency conditions. So we'll go through those emergency conditions. But for instance, if the state were to enter into a state of emergency declared by the governor, all public bodies can immediately go into a remote only scenario. That was because we learned, we were very lucky that COVID happened in March. And so that enabled us to work on the law very quickly to enable the remote only public meetings. But that state of emergency could have happened in November. The legislature wouldn't have been there. We couldn't have worked through a law change. So we codified, if there's a state of emergency, then all public bodies can go into a remote only model. Now, we'll talk more about, yes, I will define advisory versus non-advisory. I have a whole slide on that. It's a very important distinction and one that we are being asked all the time. So hybrid meetings are now required for all state bodies that are not advisory. So that's the majority of state bodies. But local bodies, there is not a hybrid requirement. And local bodies can choose to be hybrid, but there's not a requirement to. And there's a new right to access for local residents, a body's member, and the press in either direction. It could be in person or remote. So that, and there's some exceptions to that. But if you are having an only physical location meeting, there is a right to ask for digital access and vice versa. So we'll talk about that. This act also requires non-advisory bodies to electronically record their meetings and post their recordings online. We'll get to advisory bodies, but advisory bodies do not have to record. It's just non-advisory bodies that do. It requires, and I just want to acknowledge, it's kind of tricky because the law is built around a definition of advisory and then an exception to that, and the majority of the requirements are on the exception. I think you'll all understand why the definition of advisory is pretty key, because it's easier to describe who doesn't have to do the things than who does. So it's very similar to, it just creates enough ambiguity, and it's just linguistically challenging because you're always saying non-advisory bodies must do this. Every municipality needs to post the recording on their website. We talked about this a little bit, and or designate a location. And there's a new requirement for this is a little bit of teeth actually. There's a new requirement to post how you make a complaint about an open meeting law violation on the municipality's website. So that I think does add a little bit more teeth because it gives more knowledge to the public and to the bodies about what the open meeting law is. It requires annual open meeting law training for specified state and local folks. It's really the chairs of the bodies that will need to participate in the training. Our office is required to provide that training. So these presentations, we're getting feedback and skills here, but we will be doing that in a recording. It will come out in the winter so that people can watch it at any point, at any time. And then our goal is to go to every county at some point in a year. I don't know whether we're going to get that off the ground for 2025. It may be 2026, but our goal is that the office will go to each county for an open meeting law training once a year. And then we'll have the recording. And then we're responsible for a working group that has a huge task of thinking about ways to improve access and participation in meetings for public bodies, meetings for voters, and for elections. We also will be publishing and agreeing on best practice guides and accessibility guides. It's quite a large scope of what we're writing a report on. It takes effect July 1st. Fireworks are so exciting that we must have them. And there is some exceptions. So the training is not required until January because we need time to establish it. And the hybrid mandate for state non-advisory bodies and communication union districts does not go into effect until January because those bodies just said, give us time. And the legislature said, okay. Okay, this is the most important slide. What is an advisory body? I said it's the most important slide and I clicked on it. It doesn't want me to share the most important slide.
So,
I shouldn't have said that. Because the slide is, what is an advisory body? So. Good. It's a public body that does not have supervision, control, or jurisdiction over legislative, quasi-judicial, tax, or budgetary matters. There's some gray here. I think you probably all are trying to think through your specific body, and there's some gray. Our best advice is, if you are really unsure if you're advisory or not, follow the law like you're a non-advisory body. But if you feel like you're securely an advisory body, follow the law as if you're an advisory body. You know, essentially, do you have control over money? Do you make big decisions? Then maybe you're non-advisory. Definition was worked on for months, and it's the best we could get to. So, but if the public has a vested interest in your decisions and they're not reviewed again, is another way to think about it. By another body, like a subcommittee might make a recommendation for a decision, but can't actually make the decision. Then think about it from the public's perspective. There's an opportunity for them to participate in every way possible at the larger body who's going to oversee the decision. That was the intent behind the law. And I'm just going to pause right there because this is the biggest questions. And again, I just caution you, I may not be able to answer, but yes.
do you have a list of examples?
No, but I will try and make one. Let's see. A public body gives the beautification subcommittee a budget of $100,000 to buy flowers. You're not really making budgetary decisions, like you're deciding how to spend the $100,000 that you've been given, but you're not committing $100,000 of the town to something. The body's already made that decision. How you spend that money is different than deciding to spend the money, if that makes sense. No, it doesn't.
No,
It's very hard. Yeah,
It's to me.
okay.
But then, like, for my example, like a subcommittee for hiring, that does sort of fall under non-advisory.
That is a good example of non-advisory. That's advisory. In some ways, well,
That's,
you're having some control. But the question is it legislative, quasi-judicial, tax, or budgetary?
well, it's budgetary, it's salary.
Not if
Yeah.
before you gave permission to spend it.
It depends on, I suppose it could be
Right.
if you're negotiating salary in there. It's very fact dependent. And so that's why if you don't have a clear answer to, are we advisory or are we not? I think it's best to follow the non-advisory rules. But I think your question, I did it again. The question was, is there a list of advisory bodies? And my answer to that is we'll try and come up with some examples of that and some scenarios to that. I think that's a great question.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a question. It goes back to the other slide, but you don't go there. So it's June 26th and this goes in place July 1st. And those that are chairs of boards, does this meeting count towards that?
Oh.
Yeah.
It's not required until January.
But does this count towards?
I would say yes. The spirit of the law, yes.
Okay.
But we're gonna have such a compelling recording that you're gonna wanna watch it again.
I'm not gonna want to watch minutes.
I was gonna say, like retroactively to.
Yeah.
Just thinking of the list, I mean, I sent this question in and thinking of most of our small towns, we all have obviously a select board.
That is
A planning
clear.
commission, a conservation commission, a development review board, and
so far,
some
all of
cases.
those are non-advisory.
Absolutely, that's no brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
but that, yeah.
All of those are non-advisory. It's basically, we get into like a library subcommittee,
Right.
cemetery subcommittees, maybe beautification.
Fire and rescue, everybody has.
I'm sorry,
Fire and rescue.
fire and rescue, I would say that's non-advisory because that's usually a lot of money and decisions. If there's a lot of money, a lot of decisions, if you're, the public would have a lot of interest in your topic, it usually goes more to non-advisory than advisory. A
Recreation.
curriculum subcommittee for a school board, maybe it's non-advisory. I mean, maybe it's advisory.
Someone asked the rec committee.
The rec committee. In my town, that would probably be non-advisory because they make a lot of money decisions. But it's really dependent on what the authority is for the subcommittee and given by the select board and what the sort of purpose of the subcommittee is and what parameters are around it. So
Aren't they really given the budget that's passed by the town voters, like the rec committee? And if they want to go above and beyond that, then like with our town, the select board, if the rec committee is gonna go out for a study on something that wasn't, it was approved by $10,000 for studies. But once they come up with the study, it has to come back to the select board and say, we approve that study.
I
It's
think,
like
I think
payroll
the-
and everything else.
I think the nuance is if the rec department is given $250,000 to operate for a fiscal year. And then the subcommittee is making decisions about how to spend that $250,000, then they have supervision and control over a budgetary matter. But
What
this,
I'm saying the same thing. The subcommittee has to come back to the rec. And then it's in an open.
you're talking about a subcommittee of the rec board.
So if the
Yeah.
rec department has a subcommittee like you just.
Got it.
said, they have
Rec
to come
department has
back.
a subcommittee underneath it to talk about a study of how should we spend money or should we ask for more money. That may be an advisory body. Because they don't really have control, it comes back to the rec.
In an open meeting.
Yes, in an open.
Could you lean into this a little bit more? Because there's a question online. If the rec committee makes recommendations to the select board, now I know a lot of our committee work in the towns, it typically always is reporting to the select board, which is the ultimate authority. But that doesn't mean that there's still not a public body below them.
So if you're an advisory body, you're still a public body. You still have to be open. The only distinction is you don't have to meet in person or have an in-person option. It doesn't change the open meeting law for you. I'm sorry, I should have made that more clear. It doesn't change the open meeting law and the public's right to come to your meetings. It just means you do not have to have a physical location. And you can hold your meeting completely remotely. So the study committee still has to meet and be open to the public to provide input into, but you can be remote. And that's because the feedback to the legislature, the testimony really was remote is increasing public participation and it's easier to get people to serve on subcommittees if they can be remote. So they're trying to balance the access physically to the really important meetings or the meetings where the big decisions are made and the ease of 100% remote for those, I don't want to say lower, that sounds derogatory, but lower, the subs. But all are open meetings. Everybody needs to have access to all the meetings. That has not changed. What has changed is the delivery of the meeting, the modality of the meeting.
So in the case over here with the other one, okay, with the library.
Yeah.
There's a subcommittee off of the library of 2 people, which is not a quorum of our library. And they were told to go out to whatever, but I think a lot of towns are doing like those 2 people, since it's not a quorum, if it's 5. That they're out doing the homework and then they have to come back with their report to the full board. And that's where the public has.
So my understanding of the law and it, I think, again, this is a very good ask your lawyer question. And I hate to keep saying that because it's annoying. But my understanding of the law is if it's an official subcommittee If there's a standing hiring subcommittee that always is in existence, that's probably a public body.
Right.
But if it's for specific small things, it may not be a public body. But again, you really need to talk with someone who understands what you're doing and why you're doing it and how frequently you're doing it. Because it's just very fact dependent. You know, if you stand up a subcommittee for 6 months to work on, and it's how you characterize it in your minutes and how you decide who's on it and what you say the purpose of it is. So it's just, it matters, the context matters a lot.
One other kind of interesting question online is, to be non-advisory, control over public money, i.e. tax money, what if it's only over donations with a library?
I don't know, but I would, the law does not make a distinction between private money and public money. And then I think the question I would have is, once it's the donation to the library, isn't it public money? So.
Yeah, that seems logical.
Okay, any other questions about this? I see another one about.
For example, a conservation commission holds a remote meeting and has a person at a local location also online. Is that permissible? Do these meetings also have to be recorded?
Okay, so it is a local meeting that has decided to go hybrid, has a physical location, and it is a non-advisory body.
They want to hold a remote
It's like a lot.
meeting, they have one person in the location. Do they have to record their meeting? It sounds like yes and yes.
Yes.
For both of those.
The only folks who don't have to record are advisory bodies. So if you are a local body that is non-advisory, regardless of modality, where you're having the meeting, you need to record. So hybrid or in person, you need to record. And you can't have a remote only unless there's specific circumstances that allow it.
And one more.
Yes.
Because they're rolling it out. Our emergency management team has an approved budget of 4,200. The EMD is authorized to spend up to 500 without select board approval. My understanding is that this makes us a non-advisory body. Is that correct?
Talk to your lawyer.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, I don't know.
Yeah, that one's
Yeah.
pretty nuanced.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
there's a
Dan.
reality here, we just don't know yet. Like the law, even when you talk to your lawyer, they're gonna say the exact same thing. I don't know, let me think on it, let me try and figure it out, let me understand more facts. Because we're just getting the law, there's no interpretation of the law yet. You know, lawyers like to look at how the law's been interpreted previously. It hasn't been interpreted previously, so we're trying to all figure it
I
out.
would just put up the LCT said yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was the follow-up. That the LCT said yes, which makes sense because you're still spending
You're still spending money.
some money.
And I'll say, the LCT, the Secretary of State, you know, we were on a call today, we're going to say pretty consistently, if you have a question about whether you're advisory or not, please just consider yourself non-advisory, because then you don't run into accidentally stumbling into a violation of the law, because you're safe. You're doing everything the right way if you just consider yourself non-advisory. You can't get into a situation where you have inadvertently done something wrong. So.
Yeah.
All right, I'm hesitant to show this next slide because it's just so many words. Yeah, but this is what we were just talking about. And you will get this. So breaking it down, state non-advisory bodies, which most of you are not. So I'll just go right to local non-advisory bodies. You have to have a physical location for regular and special meetings, except emergency meetings, because we understand you have to get those together fast. And local incident or state of emergency, you can be remote only. So you have to record all the meetings, either audio or video, and you have to post them in a designated location online until 30 days after the minutes are approved and posted. Unless there's undue hardship, and there is a slide on undue hardship. And then local advisory bodies, you can be remote only, but there are public participation requirements, meaning if somebody requests a physical location, there's a process by which they can do that. This slide. Are we an advisory public body? This is another way of thinking about the statute as written. Do you have a final decision-making authority over any of these issues under the statute? Okay, you've decided you're advisory. What can you do? You're exempt from the physical meeting location requirement. So you can continue to meet remote only without a physical staffed location if you designate and use an electronic platform that allows direct access, attendance, and participation of the public, including telephone access. So the goals, the intent of open meeting are still there, access by the public. And you have to post that in a way that enables the public to know how to join. You know, it could be on your website, but it certainly needs to be in your agenda so that someone can find that. Your advisory, are you allowed to meet in person? Yes. Anytime you want to meet in person, you can meet in person. It's only an option, but it's not required to meet remotely. The legislature, I think, had a high value on meeting in person. You know, I think we testified quite a bit about access, digital equity. You know, a lot of us have smartphones. Some of us have two of them, unfortunately. But a lot of Vermonters don't. And the price of participation can't be a computer or a smartphone. A lot of people don't have transportation. So you want to think about remote access, even if you are required to have a physical location. But there's a lot of towns that don't have the ability, the finances to hold hybrid meetings. It's complicated. You have to have an owl or this, whatever that is, it's complicated. You have to get someone to be your IT guy for a little bit, right? So that all costs money. So the legislature was trying to balance a lot of people's needs and expectations and desires about access. So if you're advisory, then you can meet in person. You're not required to be remote. And all of the open meeting laws apply. And you can continue to conduct hybrid meetings. I think a lot of folks have transitioned to hybrid meetings. That is always a requirement for, always an option, not a requirement for any type of public body right now. Unless you're a state body, in which you're mandated to do hybrid. And that was a big topic of discussion, was should the legislature require hybrid for everybody? And there was a lot of testimony about the costs of hybrid and the burden and the struggle. I mean, it's hard here. People can't hear the questions. It takes more effort and time to run a hybrid meeting. And where the legislature landed is it's mandated for the state folks, because presumably the state should have resources to run a hybrid meeting. So that's where it landed for right now.
That's saying you have internet access so you can attend the meeting.
Well, so if you're, that's a hybrid would allow you to go in person too. But yes, that was one of the big things. Internet access, digital equity was probably one of the larger topics of discussion. Okay, you're not advisory. What do you do now? If you're a state body, you have to follow all of these requirements, and I'm gonna not go through them because I don't think any of you probably are state body, but I'm gonna make sure that the slide is in there so that if you are part of a state body, you get the information. The biggest thing is you have to record and you have to be hybrid starting in January. Local. Local means municipality or political subdivision. And so if you're non-advisory and local, then you have to have a designated staffed physical location for all regular and special meetings. you have to electronically record. That can be video or audio only. That is a distinction from the state. Our interpretation of the state is it needs to be video, just so you know, but local video or audio only. And you have to retain and post the location, the recording in a digital electronic location. That 30 days post the posting of the minutes. And again, the hybrid requirements. This is another way of looking at what we've already discussed.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So you're saying, what I'm reading, what I'm understanding is that you only have to post the recording for 30 days?
After the approval of it, you have to post it after the meeting.
How soon after the meeting?
So, it's not in the law, but, I think the best advice is to post it when you post your, minutes.
Yeah.
I think that's the prudent, the intent is that the public has access to what occurred at the meeting. That's the intent of the posting of the minutes. So, I would say as quickly as possible, post the recording, because you're gonna hear, your people are gonna start asking you for it. A recording is a public record. I mean, there's the overlap of public records, which is why I recommend that you delete them after 30 days, so you don't have to deal with the public record. Yes. But it's a public record, so someone could ask for it immediately after the meeting, and you would need to give it to them. But if you just post it, then everyone has access to it. You don't have to deal with it as a public record in that same way.
So my context is local school boards with, we had multiple votes in our town and I was trying to go remote. And one of the recordings, so this is another issue, is a recording that's not audible when you try to watch it.
Yes.
A couple of days after, so you're still not getting good information.
So that, there's no express requirement in the law around that. And sometimes these things happen inadvertently. So this is a recording, this is actually funny that we're about to say this is a recording where the commentary is unaudible once you see the recording. So in the best practices document that we're going to be creating, we're going to be talking about how to ensure that everyone can hear and see and in your recording. But the law is not specific around that.
Not perfect.
No,
And,
it's not.
I guess it just begs the question of, are there gonna be bodies out there that are doing it just to satisfy the law, even though it doesn't become usable?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't get posted in a timely manner, to be able to educate yourself to then participate in a school budget vote or whatever, to be knowledgeable, So again, more questions than answers, like you have indicated all along.
I wish that I had more like concrete answers, but I think I truly think, and maybe I'm just like a Pollyanna, but I truly think that if a body is consistently doing that the Attorney General would have a basis to take action and or
Right.
media partners would embarrass the body. And I do see that, both of those scenarios.
I would say that too. We say in our office that the transparency is the enforcement oftentimes, because we don't necessarily have enforcement powers. People call us, I get calls all the time saying, track these people down, they're doing something wrong, and we don't have statutory authority to do it, but
Right.
getting more people to them, and this is easy, I realize I'm sitting here, this is easy for all of us to say, but getting more people to the meeting, more eyeballs on the process, and certainly the media, and the more local media, the better. Statewide media is great, but we all know that the local outlets are the ones that people read. And if someone says there's something going on, people will show up and get engaged. And you're all public officials. When more people show up, that gets your attention. So
Are your best practices going to include advice on how to run a hybrid meeting?
Is our best practices going to include advice on how to run a public meeting? And I just did it, a hybrid meeting.
Yeah.
It'll be a public meeting and a hybrid meeting. And I just did a best practice, which I keep forgetting to do, and yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, any other questions?
Couple online, this is the old law, but still current. In the past, we have posted agendas in 3 locations in town, in addition to the town webpage and social media. This includes 3 public bulletin boards. Is this still the law?
It is still the law. What was added was a website, if applicable.
If applicable.
Because the law hadn't been updated when we had websites, since when we had websites. So
But if you don't have it, you don't have to worry.
if you don't have it, you don't have to create a website. You know, I would recommend if you have a Facebook, like if you're a town, you have a Facebook group. You know, if you have Front Porch Forum, you know, you're not required to do those things, but the intent is the public knows how to find that you're meeting. And I think best practice is, again, not required. You're required to post it in those locations, but the new requirement is if you have a website, you need to put it there. And if you don't have a website, think about other ways to get the word out in the way that the public, we don't really have a town square anymore where everyone's going to go look at something in the same way. We're much more mobile and transitory than that. So think about how you could reach your public.
And one more, you discussed this earlier, but the question is, if the meeting is recorded by public access TV and they have all the recordings online, what does the town need to do? Do they need to put the recording on their webpage? Can they link to it? And you had mentioned earlier, there are some options.
Yeah, you can designate the local station as the holder of your recordings, but you need to make sure that they're not going to delete them until 30 days after you approve those minutes. So it's having a conversation that you may not have had with them before on retention. And then the piece, even if they hold it, it's still a public record. And so how do you get access to it and how do you provide it are the things that I would ask you to think about, or you know, those are the things that you need to grapple with. But yes, putting video on YouTube, having local access television hold it, all okay. You just need to designate where that is, and the public needs to be able to figure that out.
Would a BCA meeting be non-advisory?
BCA.
There are BCA meetings are not recorded.
Yeah, I would say a BCA is quasi judiciary. And I think most of the time we recommend, obviously they're public meetings.
Right. We don't have them, like we just had one yesterday, so it was recorded by audio.
That's
For the
fine.
purpose of the minute.
That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, it would be okay. It would be fine if it was only recorded by audio, even after July 1st, because you're a local body. A BCA is a local body.
Okay.
Yes.
How about town meeting or informational meeting? We have an owl, but it really doesn't do much in the gym when you're trying to
Yeah.
talk to 40 or 50 people.
So I have a slide on that, and I'm gonna get there.
Okay.
A really complicated issue. So, any other questions? That question was informational meeting before a town meeting. And there is a slide that's coming. Electronic recordings of meetings. So again, electronically record, state must have video, local can be video or audio only. Undue hardship. Undue hardship means that there's significant difficulty or expense in light of factors, which can be the overall size of the entity, sufficient personnel and staffing, availability, your budget, and the costs. And so that, I saw that question and I want to answer it. The undue hardship exception is only available to municipal and public bodies with regards to electronic recordings and requests for access. And the burden of proving undue hardship is on the municipality. If you were challenged, you would have to defend why you didn't record. Or why you didn't provide access in the way that the person was requesting. I saw the question about editing a recording to remove information. The answer is no, you cannot edit a recording to remove public information, just like you couldn't edit a document unless there's a specific exception that applies. And those exceptions should probably never apply to an open meeting. Those exceptions apply to documents and things that are usually not within an open meeting. Now, the exception would be if there was a recording of an executive session, which please don't do that. Don't do that. But if that were true, you may, again, consult with your lawyer and they will tell you, please never do this again. But don't do that. And they would help you work through whether or not you should release it.
This may be a little too specific, but at a recent select board meeting, at the end of the meeting, there was concern raised about a homeless person that was sleeping outside the town office. And the family started revealing information, and that really shouldn't have been in the public meeting and recorded. So I can't take that out.
No.
Okay.
What about deliberative session?
Deliberative session, please don't record them.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't want the public to have access to it, don't hit record. And then if you're going into deliberative or executive session, stop the recording.
Great question, or a follow-up question to that.
But just, can I just clarify?
Yes, yeah,
Make sure that you put on the record why you're going into executive session, why you're going into deliberative session, while you're on the recording, while the public has access to it. And when you come out, make sure that you say, we're coming out of deliberative session on this topic, and hold your vote in the public. Okay, those are just basic open meeting law. These slides don't really cover that, but I just think it's really important. The goal is the public knows when you went into deliberative session, what you were talking about. The more clear you can be, the better. I know it's very tricky, both with deliberative and executive sessions, because you're talking about something that's usually sensitive. But the goal is that the public can trust that you know why you went in, and that you're only going to talk about those things, and you know when you came out, and they can know what you talked about. And if it's unclear or squidgy, that's a technical term, squidgy. But if it's unclear or squidgy, then the public starts to not trust why you went in, and that you only talked about the things that you said you were going to talk about.
it's more of a logistical concern, but I know in a lot of our towns, executive sessions logistically cap the meeting at the end.
Yes.
So to end a recording, go into executive session just to adjourn without any action, would you have to re-record that, like, we are
When you come out, you have to vote.
coming out,
You
but
have to vote after your.
if there was no vote on
Oh,
it,
my God. Okay.
which is a lot of the case, and then you're adjourning, is that
I
little?
would recommend that you do, because I think the public has an interest in how long you were in the executive session.
Okay.
And I understand why public bodies do that. It makes a lot of logistical sense, but I don't think the law doesn't expressly require it. But I think that in best practices, when we're developing those, that will be part of our recommendation, is that you do come back in and officially close the meeting on the record.
Okay.
Because the intent of the law is every part of the meeting that is public is recorded.
Mhm.
And so if you look at it from that lens, maybe the law is specific. I'm doing a
Yeah.
horrible job right now, because I'm answering your question and thinking it through at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think the law answers your question, because the law says every part of the public meeting needs to be recorded. And that would include that 2 minutes at the end where someone makes a motion, it says to adjourn, and everyone seconds it, and it's 9:42 because the executive session was way too long.
This came up, we had a situation where in the public comment period, at the beginning of a public meeting that was being recorded by a public access television station, there was people making comments that were, people found offensive, or basically it was hate speech. So after the meeting, the board wanted to remove that from the recording, and the public access television station was like, no, that happened. That gets to the reasonable parameters that the chair can set for public comment during the meeting.
Right.
To a certain extent, in terms of controlling what's happening at the meeting.
And the intent is that the person who's attending the meeting remotely after the fact has the same access as the person who's in the room,
No matter how offensive.
no matter how offensive. And that's a tricky part about our democracy.
We were getting that call from the public access television station, not from the board itself. So we will get those questions from everyone.
Okay, I'm gonna answer one more question from you in the back.
Yeah, so on that exact same thing there, I was told from a pay TV locally in Rutland that if the board has policy that states that no language can, that a public radio has, if it's not in there, then they have to do it.
That's right.
Okay, but I'm gonna come back to this bit about counting on pay TV to be recorded. Because sometimes, like in Killington, we have pay TV that shows up. We also record our meetings on the Zoom call, okay? Because you can't always trust that they're gonna, okay?
I think that's best practice. I mean, all of these platforms have a record, the majority of them, I don't want to say all, but the ones that most people use have a record function.
But
And
then also, pay TV normally leaves when you say we're going into executive session, and not be there.
right,
When we have our board meeting, if it's like for real estate, for going into executive or personnel, we will sometimes say, well, we're going into the executive session. We're going to come out and adjourn, there will be no action taken. Or we will take action, so then we'll have to turn the recording back.
I think that's the prudent way to deal with that, yeah,
Okay?
so that the public knows
And we're not
what your
taking
intent is
all
going
the
to
time.
be, yes. In that scenario where you're recording, it's being done by a third party who's going to leave, not wait for the hour and a half that you're in executive session. I think,
So you pretty much know if you're going to take action or not take action.
So
before you go.
those of you, attending remotely, if you have a third party who's going to be recording and they're gonna leave because you're going into executive session, probably a best practice is to put on the record before you go into executive session that you're gonna come, when you come out of executive session, you're going to take no action and immediately adjourn. So the public knows what you're gonna do, what your intent was after the executive session. Okay. Was there any questions online that I had?
Nope.
Okay, good. Requests for access. People who can request access are a resident in the geographic location where the public body has jurisdiction, a member of a public body, or a member of the press. The person who's a member of the press does not have to be a resident of your town. It could be someone who's on the public body could be asking for a different type of access. You can request either a designated physical location if it's a remote only, or you can request electronic or telephone access if it is a meeting that only has an in-person component. So if you only meet in person, you don't do hybrid, somebody can ask for digital access to your in-person only meeting. It has to be in writing and the requester does not need to state why. And it needs to be at least 2 days before the meeting. And the requester cannot ask for continual, perpetual remote access. It's one meeting, not a whole series of meetings.
And who do they ask?
The body. They would put it in writing to the chair or to the public.
So the chair, are they obligated to share it with the rest of the board?
There is not a requirement that it goes to the whole board.
So it's just the chair.
But I mean, this is a really new developing law. And so as chair, think carefully about when and how you would say no to that request. And I just note that the law is not, does not require if it's a physical location, it's a physical location. There's not much of a debate about what a physical location is. But if it's digital access, it does not specify video feed. It can be telephone only. So it really is supposed to not be a large burden to move towards digital access. Physical access is more tricky if you're an advisory remote only body and somebody asks for a physical location. You may not have space or standing spot, security. There may be all sorts of considerations. And that was not really, addressed in the same way as digital access, which it can be telephone only. So the law says that you shall grant access, so it's pretty much like you will do it unless, the one that's probably most debatable is the undue hardship on a municipality. The other ones are all hazards event or declared state of emergency or a local incident, which we'll talk about what a local incident is. And then it, as I said, it only applies to the next regularly scheduled meeting. It's not a series of regular meetings, whether they're regular meetings, special meetings, or emergency meetings. And it specifically does not apply to field visits. The legislature did not want to require digital access to field visits. Understandable.
If I may, I do a packet of information for my board members that they get before the meeting. But sometimes there are handouts at the meeting, so does that access mean we have to provide the packet to the people requesting, and how do we do it in the middle of a meeting if we've got some information that comes in at the meeting? Is that part of
I'm
the?
sorry, I just had my own computer problem, so can you repeat your question and I'll,
Sure.
Yeah.
I prepare information for the select board before the meeting.
Yes.
And they get that. But sometimes they get more information at the meeting. If somebody wants remote access, I mean, I can send them what I sent the select board electronically, but at the meeting, how do I make sure?
This
they
is-
get access? to
so your
information?
question is you have a board member who's asked to attend remotely.
No, somebody from the public.
Somebody from the public.
Wants access. How much information do they get, and am I required to provide something electronically while they're at the meeting? I mean, we've been holding up maps and stuff in front of the owl so people can kind of see it, but.
So the question is, somebody's attending remotely and the information is expanded during the public meeting because the other materials for the meeting were posted online or given to the public beforehand, but new information is happening. The law doesn't say exactly what you have to do. There's nothing in the law that says that. But I think the goal would be that if there's something new, and members of the public have access to it, a handout is given to everybody, that you try to post it into the comments of the meeting. Like share it within the platform if possible, and or post it on your website if possible, or say that it will be available at a later time for people to review. There's lots of ways to do it, but it's adding a lot of complication to add new information during a meeting, as you well know, because you're the person responsible for the packet. So,
And you don't have the technical capability to say, it's not shared.
yeah, my computers are very frustrating. So, yeah, so that's something to think about. And if you're the chair of a body, maybe you think about getting to a place where you have everything that you reasonably anticipate. You have deadlines. If it doesn't come in on time, you talk about it at the next meeting for all of these reasons, because it creates all of these complications. That again, it's not a requirement. So.
If telephone access is allowed as then how would you possibly?
You can't is the answer. If telephone access is allowed, how can you possibly share? You can't. So, I mean, that's the problem with telephone access. It's not equal. And that's why state bodies are not allowed to use it. And local bodies are, but it was compromised in the conversation because of the cost of requiring. So I think it was a reasonable cost, but I think there's an element, a recognition, I guess, that if the public decides to attend it only by phone, that's the type of access they're choosing to do because they could come in person.
Right, all you have to do is let them know, like, come in person.
Yeah.
And actually then provide.
Right. Yep. So, I think all of this is trying to balance the intent and trying to make sure that people understand their options. And hopefully we'll get to a place where we have some more firm guidance, but right now we're really talking about best practices and trying to figure out what the law means and how it should be applied.
And as we mess up, we learn.
Hopefully none of us are gonna mess up, but yeah, we're learning all the time, right? That's part of it. What is a local incident? See? Computers.
We can see it online.
You can see it online? Okay, good.
But we want to be able to see the same that they say.
I know, right? They have unequal access. And I can't read it there because my bifocals need to be updated.
Slide. Before you went backwards to go forward again.
Yeah, I've done that trick.
Yeah, that's what's happening. You get, the only other option is unshare and reshare.
Okay, Brian, I'm gonna ask you to do that. So this is actually embarrassingly my second computer failure because I brought this computer and it never turned on. So.
Is there a way to refresh the screen?
Well, a local incident, I can do it a little bit without the.
I could also pull it up and just peel access away from everyone.
Okay, a local incident, it could be, it's something specific to the location. And it could be a weather event, a loss of power or telecommunications, a public health emergency. It doesn't have to just be a declared state of emergency like COVID was. It could be something,
I'm gonna try to share it again.
okay. It could be something, that, is local, you know, a measles outbreak, God forbid. A public safety threat. This is something that the legislature responded to. So if there's a threat that a member of the public believes might place a member or another person in a reasonable apprehension of death or serious bodily injury, then that can be considered a local incident and the meeting can move to all remote. So thank you so much. That could be and that would impede the ability of and it can go in both directions. It could impede the ability for the body to meet electronically or hold a hybrid meeting or physical. So if there's a power outage, you probably can't hold a hybrid or a remote meeting. If there's a physical threat, you don't want to have a physical meeting. It can be in either direction. This slide is saying the same thing I just said. It's either direction. So what do? You've identified you have a local incident. What do you do? The highest ranking officer of the public body must make a formal written finding and announcement that includes the basis of the finding. So this is the legislature wanting to ensure that this isn't done willy-nilly, that this is done with consideration, and that it's documented and formalized. If you can, you should publicly announce it and post the notice of that meeting location or platform, the change. So the public can attend just in a different venue, very similar to special meetings or emergency meetings, sort of follow that guidance. And remote only meetings, if you're using your local incident authority, you're a non-advisory body, and you're saying, we had a local incident, we're gonna go remote only, you have to use technology that permits public participation and telephone access. So back to the standard requirement. Okay. I'm going to just pause there before I get into this next slide about open meeting violations. Does anyone have any questions? No? So, not a good slide.
Back to the public comment section of the agenda. I think I heard you say that the public can only comment on the business listed on the agenda, so the public cannot bring up any new issues without having requested the topic to be added
Yes,
to the agenda in advance. Is that
Yes.
correct?
yes. That's a constraint in the law. Now, a lot of public bodies don't adhere to that and allow the public to bring up anything at any time. It's totally okay to allow that. And you don't have to only allow the public to comment on the business of the meeting, but that is a constraint that's written into the law that chairs can enforce. You're not required to, but you can. And there's reasons to do that, and there's reasons not to do that. You know, depending on what the issue is, you may want to talk about it, you may not want to talk about it. If you don't want to talk about it, maybe the reason that you should allow the person to talk about it. So all of those are very fact-driven and very dependent, and that's why, you know, we want to make sure that, well, dovetails really well into the trainings. Why we want to make sure that chairs of public bodies have trainings on all of this, because it's very complicated. Open meeting law, you know, most chairs have been on a body for a period of time, so learn from the body that they're part of. Some public bodies are excellent and have really great meeting hygiene, and but some don't. And so, and most people who are on public bodies really want to do the right thing and want the training, and that's why you're all here. So, but up to the first point, you have to, municipalities have to put on their websites, if they maintain one, an explanation of the procedures for submitting notice of an open meeting law violation to the body itself and to the Attorney General, because there's two remedies that are available to the public. And a copy of the law, and it's 1 VSA 314. It's not actually that long, but it is statutory language, and the requirement is that it's put on your website. And then the following officers need to participate in annual open meeting law training that our office is going to be putting on. And it's the chairs, the state chairs of non-advisory bodies, and the local chair of legislative bodies, town managers, and mayors. You will notice the terms for local body, the required does not have non-advisory and advisory. It's a more limited list. It is legislative bodies, town managers, and mayors.
And today counts.
I'm sorry?
And today counts.
Yeah.
You have to participate in the beginning.
Well, that's probably
No.
You have to participate at beginning January 1st, 2025. I
Yeah.
want today to count.
Okay.
Lauren Brown
Yeah, I-
certificates for everybody.
I'm Deputy Secretary, not
Even though the law goes into effect July 1, today counts.
Yeah.
Everything that you learn today is gonna just build on the training you're gonna
Yeah.
take. It's gonna be wonderful. So Act 1, the COVID flexibilities of 2023 expires on Monday. The new law goes into effect on Monday, and all the other requirements still are there. The one change is the posting of the agenda on the website. Outside of the new, you know, but substantially changing the previous open meeting law. But there's all those other fun modifications. So what's next? We are going to convene a working group on participation and accessibility of municipal public meetings and elections starting this summer. We are going to be talking about best practices, which we've talked about a ton in this room, and both literal room and figurative room. To talk about how to run effective and inclusive meetings. It's even with the best intentions, it's tricky. You've seen how I've struggled with it today. So it can be tricky. with the goal of maximizing participation and accessibility, and identified that technical assistance, equipment, and training needed for municipalities for effective and inclusive remote and hybrid meetings. So you can see where the legislature wants to go. They just didn't want to put this requirement on local folks without understanding the burden that would put on local folks and without the support to municipalities. We are in the Secretary of State's office, we have the Vermont Records and Archives Administration. And there is an updated records schedule for all sorts of things, but particularly the electronic recordings. So that is coming out. And then we'll have the training online on January 1st, 2025. And here's the general questions. Does anyone have any questions? More questions? Yeah.
If our towns are interested in pursuing a hardship claim, how would they go about doing that? And to who would they file that claim?
That's a great question. I'm gonna have to research it. I believe it needs to be documented, much like the local incident, but I don't have that section of the law as firm in my mind as I want to in order to provide the answer. So I'll make sure that we answer that question in our question.
Slides for us in the room today. You guys have our emails when we like filled out the registry?
We don't.
Sign in there.
Right.
Just fill out one of these.
Fill out
and
one of
then
those
you
forms,
get
just put your email on there, that'd be great.
Cool,
Everyone
thank you.
else online emailed their.
Devin, do you have it on your website, the slide?
We do not yet, but we can post it and we'll have it, the recording on our YouTube.
Within 3 days?
Nope.
Sure.
So I work for the city of Rutland, so we have the fire department, we have a police department, we have a rec department, we have a department of public works. So like for the police department, because they're part of the municipality, they should also follow these rules.
Are they having open meetings?
They are,
Yes.
like they have a meeting like once a month.
Yes.
A police commission meeting, so they should be recording and they should be putting those recordings out on the website.
Yes.
Even your 501(c)s, you go with that.
Yeah, because I know that our level at the city hall and how we do it is not the same level necessarily what they do. So I just want to make sure that I'm giving.
They're
the
having
appropriate
open
information.
meetings now.
Yes.
So yes, they need to transition to recording their meetings. Yes. The question was, the fire commission, whether they need to, a police commission, whether they need to follow this new law, and the answer is yes. And here's our contact information. If you have specific questions, you can always email Jenny Prosser. She's our general counsel and director of municipal assistance. We are putting up as many resources as possible. We're building them. You're seeing them live time. I've already seen some things that I want to change a little bit. So, but we're going to get those up on our website too, so that will be available. And then Vasara is where the record schedule will be. And there's also a one-page sheet that I just looked at this week that is easier to understand than the standard records retention schedule. So that, like, a quick guide is what we're trying to create. So, and I just want to say, my name is Lauren Hibbert, Hibb, as in two boys, ERT at vermont.gov. And please, you can email me too. I'm happy to try and get answers to your questions.
Is there a dot?
There is a dot. It's Lauren.Hibbert, HI, boy, ERT at vermont.gov. And it's been a real pleasure being with you guys tonight. Thank you so much. And it's really nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody online. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I got my own
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for coming.
you.